Welcome everybody to our I don't want to say interagency, the task force on human trafficking led by the New York State Assembly Minority Republican Conference. This is one of many meetings we are having throughout the state of New York. We are going to start this off with some introductions from my colleagues. We'll talk a little bit about why we're here. We're going to have everybody introduce themselves, say just a quick little bit of who you are and what it is that has brought you here. And then we're going to get right to work with specific breakout sessions. It looks like we have a group that I think I'm going to keep together in one group. We've done that in several different locations where we've actually had a large group, broke it up into 4 different groups. But I think with this group, we should be okay to kind of stay at the table, bring up each topic, and then go from there. So the first thing I'm going to do is ask my colleagues, my fellow Assembly members, including our host, Assemblyman Scott Bendett, just to say some introductory remarks.
Okay, I'm Scott Bendett. I'm a New York State Assemblyman from the 107th District, representing Washington County, most of Rensselaer County, Columbia County, and the town of Bethlehem that services 4 counties. And I'm grateful for my team that has put this together to raise awareness for an issue that has seems to have been swept under the rug a little bit. So now it gives us a chance to push it out into the open, and hopefully we can come up with some solutions.
Thank you. And next up, our co-chair of our Human Trafficking Task Force, Assemblywoman Mary Beth Walsh.
Thank you very much. Hi, everybody. Good afternoon. I'm Mary Beth Walsh, and I serve the 112th Assembly District, which is mostly Saratoga County. I represent 1 town in Schenectady County and 1 town in Fulton County. And in January, if everything works out all right, I'll be representing a 2nd town in Fulton County. My background is as an attorney. The last dozen or so years I've been in family court representing children. And I think I was kind of reflecting a little bit on the way over. My work for a lot of years is centered around people who are vulnerable, whether it's individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities, children, the work that we've done in the Assembly having to do with nursing home patients. So I think, that's always been something I think that's very important. I think one of our roles as legislators is to make sure that we're developing laws that help protect our most vulnerable. And I think that the people that we're about to speak about today and consider fall under that heading as well. So I'm really looking forward to the conversation. I can't say that as a local resident my whole life that this is something that I really know much about. So I know that we've got a lot of people here that are going to be able to give us some good information that we can hopefully have going forward. So I just want to thank everybody very much for taking the time to participate and offer your expertise, and I'm really looking forward to the conversation.
Thank you, Assemblywoman, and we are super grateful for her stepping up to co-chair this task force and do some traveling around the state as well. Another one of our local Assembly members that is here, Assemblyman Matt Simpson.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. I'm really happy that my colleagues brought this together. Before I came here, I was actually at a seniors picnic in Warren County, and I represent Warren, parts of all 5 counties: Warren, Washington, Essex, Saratoga, and 1 community in Fulton County. So it's a large rural district, and this really kind of shows why it's important to come together and talk about this. But I was at a seniors picnic, and I had a woman that I was speaking to, and I told her that I was coming here from there, and she had gone on to tell me how she had been victimized. So, this topic is so important to bring out of the dark. I mean, we've all heard of this, heard about human trafficking, but it's like many other things, substance abuse. We don't think it happens in our backyard. We don't think it's impacting our neighbors or our families. It's one of those topics that not a lot of people want to talk about. I mean, I have experiences in my own family with my daughter that there's a period of time I don't know where she was, what happened, and she's not talking about it. But it impacted her life, and it's going to impact her life for the rest of her life. So I want to thank you all for being here and participating, and I'm looking forward to hearing what you all have to say.
Thank you, sir. So we are here because many of our Republican members, we had a public hearing last summer, And we heard testimony from survivors of both sex and labor trafficking and exploitation. And we were really educated that day, a lot of us, myself included. And the one thing that was really alarming to us was when we looked at New York State, we saw that in the early 2000s, New York State took a lead nationally, changed the penal law to really define human trafficking and go after individuals and create deterrence. But since that time, since about 2007, maybe a little later, we've fallen behind. And we need to be a leader again, as we have been in the past on this issue. And that first starts with educating ourselves from people like you who are on the ground to tell us what we need to do from a legislative standpoint, what we should be asking for from a funding and resource standpoint. But my favorite part so far of these discussions is listening to people and figuring out how unique you are dealing with these challenges in your own communities. We heard some amazing things in Long Island and Suffolk County and Nassau County. We're going to be traveling around to Buffalo, Syracuse, Hudson Valley. And when we put our report together, we should have some great recommendations. We should hopefully give the state interagency task force the tools it needs to do their job the way that we know we can do it. But really, I think we're just going to learn a lot from people who are doing so much with so little. And I know that's going to be a big part of today. So without further ado, we're going to go around the room and then get into our 4 specific topics in our breakout discussions. We'll start to my left.
Hoping I was the last one. Right. I am Jackie Salvatore. I'm the undersheriff in Columbia County. Been there for 3 years now. I did 28 years in state police, retired in 2016. I failed retirement, hence I'm back. But just really grateful to be here. You know, I mentioned previously to Assemblyman Bendet that a number of things happen right under your noses and you're unaware of it, because in policing, you know, especially in this day and age where every police agency is short-staffed, we are primarily reactive, you know, and hoping to get some tools so we can be more proactive and lend a hand with this very important topic.
Thank you.
Hi, everybody. Captain Justin Wallery, Rensselaer County Sheriff's Office. I've been at the Sheriff's Office for 15 years, captain for a couple months, 5 years in the jail, 10 years on the road. I want to just piggyback on what the undersheriff said is, you know, we don't know what we don't know, so I'm here to learn. And if you look at like a lot of drugs trafficking through the county, Route 7, the Heroin Highway, and so on and so forth, what if it's just not drugs? What if it's humans?
Sure.
So I'm here with open ears and free to listen.
Thank you.
Mary Pat Donnelly, Rensselaer County District Attorney. I'm a lifelong resident of Rensselaer County, and I've been involved in the criminal justice system as an attorney for 27 years. I too am very eager to hear what everybody has to say and to learn what we can do to shed a light on this, because I think it's time. Thank you.
Tony Jordan, I'm the Washington County District Attorney in my 11th year. And I think the one thing I would add, and I could find my bills here as well, that part of the discussion too is not the traditional view of human trafficking. It is the young, the children and the women primarily, but also boys that are impacted by it, I think really from the drug issues that we face and the lack of services. So I'm happy to be here and hope to leave with some great guidance for you all as to where to go with the legislative.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Robert Gibson. I'm the Commissioner of the Columbia County Department of Social Services. Columbia County is a safe harbor county, has been going back to 2018. That program, I run an association with the Mental Health Association of Columbia County. They also operate a child advocacy center. And you know, we're doing our best to just cooperate with all the authorities, educate the community the best that we can. But I would tell you there's still a lot to learn. Even in our positions, we're not privy to the type of information on the ground, and when certain things do come to us, unfortunately, it's still too much of a surprise. So very, very happy to be here or involved with any group that's working harder for this and talk a little bit more about it. And I would encourage every county out there, my fellows are here today. They're safe harbor counties, and it's a good thing. gets a lot of money for outreach. So thanks for having me.
Thank you.
I'm Consetta Bureau, the Director of Social Services for Saratoga County. I've been with Saratoga County for 27 years. Most of that time in the child welfare arena. We are also a safe harbor county and have been for a long time. We partner with Saratoga Center for the Family for a long time, in addition to Captain. And I'm also just interested to see what we can do as a group to try to move this along.
Thank you, Soto.
Good afternoon, all. Mike McMahon, I'm the Social Services Commissioner for Rensselaer County. I've been here for about 2 years and 2 months. Before that, I was in Montgomery County for 12 years as a commissioner there. That's when we began Safe Harbor, like you did about. When I first heard about Safe Harbor, and I looked at it, I said, is this a solution looking for a problem? Is it really happening? It didn't take long for me to find out that it was. My prior experience with this, I saw it through a different lens, was I was an operations manager for a global transportation company, and I saw trafficking on grand scale. And before that, like Jackie, I failed in retirement too. I was held captive by the Marines for 22 years as a Navy corpsman, and I did a lot of work in places where trafficking is Johannesburg, Valparaiso, South America, and it's a way of life, And so a lot of what we're seeing here is part of that culture, I think, and it's something we don't totally understand. The services that we need, I have some ideas, but we have a lot of work to do. And you're right, I think it has been buried to a degree. Things have changed since we became a safe harbor county back in 2014. Just think what's happened since 2014. 10 years. The obvious ones pop out, COVID, but transgender kids. That wasn't something we were talking about 10, 15 years ago. And yet they're a big portion of it. Foster kids that are trafficked. So things have changed quite a bit. I think it's time to shed some awareness and do these kind of roundtables to share information. I think it's very important. And I thank the Assembly minority for doing it.
Thank you.
I am Kevin Maloney. I'm the Executive Director at the Stark Children's Center here in Rensselaer County. We run the Child Advocacy Center for the county, and then we partner with Rensselaer County DSS to run the Safe Harbor program as well. We've been running the Safe Harbor program for many years at this point. However, with this population, we are challenged every day. Very difficult population to work with, probably one of the most vulnerable populations that we work with. Constantly trying to think outside the box as far as solutions. This is one of those programs where discretionary funds become very important because we never know really what we're going to be faced with. Do we need to purchase a plane ticket because we're dealing with something across states? Do we need money just to buy food? Do we need a hotel room? There's many different things, so that's very important to programming with this population. So definitely happy to be here and part of the conversation.
Thank you, Kevin.
Hello, I'm Tabitha Dunn. I'm the Director of Unity House Domestic Violence Services. I also oversee our clinical programming. I've been at Unity House 23 years, so like my whole life. And I do really appreciate the support we've gotten for the trafficking victims that we serve. We have been held a long time contract with OTDA to do the state certifications for trafficking victims, not just here in Rensselaer County, but we can service really anybody between the New York City program and the Buffalo program. And we do that on a regular basis. Some of the other parts of that contract beyond the state certifications is also we provide case management and therapy services to trafficking victims. We serve both labor and sex trafficking victims. So I'm really interested to hear what all of you have to say, and I also really appreciate you inviting service providers to the table to share our experiences as well.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Ashley Hart. I'm the Prevention Program Director at Unity House, and I oversee our trafficking department. So thank you.
Thanks, Ashley.
Hi, my name is Danielle Tracy. I am a forensic nurse examiner with St. Peter's Health Partners. We have basically we're on call 24/7. We respond to all three of our emergency rooms at Samaritan Hospital, St. Peter's Hospital, and Albany Memorial. to any report, how I like to put it, if somebody is hurt by another person. So we do see quite a few trafficking, because we do see domestic violence, physical assault, sexual assault. I also have the privilege of working full-time in the department, so I get to work closely with the crime victim services in prevention and education, so a lot of community outreach.
Thank you.
My name's Diana Praga. I'm also work side by side with Danielle through the forensic examiner program at St. Peter's. Kind of going along what Danielle says, we do get to see patients firsthand in a vulnerable state, getting them to be comfortable with us and hopefully elaborating a little bit on what has taken place and where we can help them, and also reassuring them and making them informed of the services that are provided and available to them, because a lot of them don't realize what we can offer, and then what like the advocate team can offer to them, counseling, safe housing, that kind of stuff. So
Thank you.
yeah.
I'm Nadia Jamara. I'm the SANE coordinator at Glens Falls Hospital. I have been at the hospital since 2000 as a registered nurse and in the emergency department since 2003. We care for victims of violence. That's my main job now, but we also, I'm also an ED nurse too, and I think my first experience with human trafficking was in around 2010, and I didn't think it happened in this country, so it took me a really long time to, it was before the Safe Harbor program, so I'm just really thankful to be here, that people are shedding light on this and coming up with some solutions. So thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, I'm Bill Backhay. I'm the controller for Miller Industrial Manufacturing in Glens Falls. I'm here because I'm a firm believer that the business community has to be part of the solution, that we need to step up and take a lead. We've raised, started a coalition of community members, healthcare, social workers, nonprofits, business, law enforcement, and how can we come together to support the people doing the work. We've started a nonprofit called the Lower Adirondack Alliance for Freedom. Purposes initially is to help raise funding to come behind the people doing the work, because their budgets are so thin, you can't operate if you don't have money, right? So we want to come behind these people doing the work. We want to help raise awareness, prevention. We've had a couple of panel discussions that had standing room only crowds. The North Country seems to be prime and ready for this, and the business community is coming together. We want to see businesses educate their employees on what trafficking looks like, because the eye doesn't see what the mind doesn't know. So we need to get people to recognize it, so when you see it, we know what to do. Thank you.
Thank you, Bill.
Thank you, Bill. My name is Jason McLaughlin, and I'm the executive director for Wait House. Wait House is a runaway and homeless youth coalition in Glens Falls, New York. We operate out of Warren County. We do a number of different services. We do emergency housing for transitional age youth 16 to 24. We have a transitional living program, which is primarily parenting and pregnant teens. We also have a family opportunity center where we do clinical services. We do social work services, youth peer support services, family peer support services, and we have a housing program helping victims and survivors of human trafficking find safe and affordable housing. We run the street outreach program, and we are the Safe Harbor coordinator for Warren County. So just to give some perspective, we work with the most vulnerable kids in our communities, kids and families that are struggling. So far this year, in October, we've had 38 referrals of potential victims or survivors of human trafficking under the age of 18 in Warren County alone. And I'm grateful to be here, and I appreciate Assemblyman Simpson inviting.
Can you repeat those numbers again?
38 in 2024 so far.
Under the age of 18.
Under the age of 18. So, according to Office of Family and Children's Services, the average age of a trafficking victim in New York State is 13.
Thanks, Jason.
Hello, everybody. Inspector Thomas Prisner with the Albany County Sheriff's Office, representing Sheriff Craig Apple. I'm honored to be here. Assemblyman Bennett, we appreciate the invite. And I think Assemblyman Simpson said it best: you never know what's happening in your own yard. And this is something that is an issue, and I think this is a perfect step in the right direction. We work closely with a not-for-profit agency in our backyard, and Shakira's Technologies, who we deal with at the correctional facility, monitors our phone calls and our iPad usage for the inmates. It's an issue. There is no doubt about it, and the age is significantly young, and it's all social media based from my experiences. So this is a step in the right direction. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Jennifer Buckley. I am the Bureau Chief in the Special Victims Unit at the Saratoga County DA's office. I've been at the DA's office for 20 years, and I've been a Special Victims Unit prosecutor for 18 years. I primarily prosecute sex offenses, and during the last 18 years, I have been part of the multidisciplinary team in Saratoga County. I think we are very fortunate in that our team works extremely well together. We have problems, issues, we talk. If we need resources for a victim or we have a unique situation, everyone gets together and jumps right in. So we have been very fortunate in Saratoga County that we've had a good team to work with. However, we are always looking for new resources, new ways to help, and any tools to combat this problem. So happy to be here.
Hi, everybody. My name is Mike Maloney. I'm the Director of Client Services at Wellspring in Saratoga. For those who don't know, Wellspring is domestic violence and sexual assault provider for Saratoga County, as well as being the sexual assault services provider for Washington County. I've been there for a whole 6 weeks. The 26 years prior to that, however, I worked at Unity House here in Rensselaer County. The number of capacities included with Tabitha at DD for a short period of time. But in that time, had some opportunity to see how serious this issue is of human trafficking with our trafficking program in Unity House. And I'm just very glad to be here to talk more about this important subject.
Good afternoon. My name is Kevin Herrick. I am with the Saratoga County Sheriff's Office. I oversee the Criminal Investigations Unit. I've been with the Sheriff's Office for 26 years. So in my past, I've worked with, a lot of the DA's office and in the internet and, that world of this type of crime. So I'm glad to be here.
Thank you. Okay, so we're gonna breeze through this. We're gonna get a lot done, and it's gonna go by really, really quickly, as I have learned, because there's so much talent and experience in this room. So this is a little bit larger of a group. Usually we would break this down into 4 different groups, but I'm very, very interested to hear what everybody has to say that's in this room. So Bernadette, whoever has the best penmanship, I think we're gonna have a staff member do each one. So whoever we want to nominate to be our note taker on these boards. This is really important for us for our report that we're going to end up gathering and to make sure we record everybody's feedback. Okay, so the first topic, and we're going to do this 20 minutes each, is how can New York strengthen support for survivors and communities? So when we say survivors, we're talking about the folks that are going through trafficking. And when we talk about our communities, we are talking about our nonprofits that are on the front lines, but we're talking about any other aspect of that community that you can educate us on that we ought to think about how we can support from what is happening. So with that being said, we'll put it out there. Who wants to talk first about this very important topic? How can New York strengthen support for survivors and communities? Yes, Jason, you're up.
I'm sure you want to do that. No, there's several issues, for survivor support and community support. There's multiple different issues that go along with that. First is feeling safe. We all, as human beings, we all want to feel safe. Victims and survivors don't often feel safe, and many times that has to do with the current laws that are in place in New York State. I tell stories. So this is a real quick story. Last year we had 13 and 16-year-old young people who was being snuck out of their window. The mom was disabled on the couch. This man was trafficking them, had a warrant out for his arrest for sexual relationships with a minor. Was pulled over, found with an illegal handgun. He was detained and released, and he's gone. So this family had to pack up, and move to Florida. We don't know where they are, but they had to move to Florida because they simply didn't feel safe. They didn't feel protected. Now we have to understand something, that trafficking is a multi-billion-dollar business, and these people are smart. They're businessmen, they're smart. They use our current laws, lower the age laws in particular, to manipulate these laws to promote the exploitation of children. Okay? So if you can't be convicted of a crime, there is no victim, right? So, some reform along these lines to protect and to make the survivors feel safe and the communities to feel safe, and the people that are doing the work, the anti-trafficking work, to also feel safe. I'm only speaking for White House, but in some of the other community organizations I know, but staff turnover is so large because in a sense they don't feel safe. The trafficking coordinators don't feel safe because it's dangerous work. And if you interfere with somebody's business, they're going to come after you.
So for that bullet point, we definitely want to write down raise the age, laws protecting trafficking victims, and certain state policies promoting the exploitation of children. Yes.
This is why we got to engage the business community, because you're fighting a business. So you need to come at it with business ideas. How do we collaborate what you're doing with that mindset? The end game is victims have to go somewhere. They need a job, a safe job, a job with dignity. So we got to get businesses on board with the idea we're going to provide jobs and that we're going to walk with these people, not just, hey, we're with you 9 to 5, but we're with you Saturday and Sunday too. There's people within the businesses that will walk with them because you have a greater chance of survival if you have a buddy, right? Somebody in it with you. And prevention. We got to cut down on traffickers look at human beings as a commodity, right? How do we cut down on their commodity? Prevention. And we got to use technology. I don't know if law enforcement, have you heard of Spotlight?
Yes.
Tapping into things like that, right? We got to get after social media, and ultimately parents have got to stop giving fully loaded iPhones to their 8-year-olds because that's the gateway to their kids' souls.
Somebody, for the rest of us, can you define Spotlight, what that is?
Well, basically, if it's the same thing that we're talking about, it's a website where we can look up to see different telephone numbers and stuff, and if they're associated with different online ads and people who are putting themselves out there at risk.
We'll put education on those comments because we are going to get to law enforcement resources and what we can do on our next topic.
And also safe housing. Tim Tebow's charity called Her Song is opening up houses in Albany. I'm hearing they might be close to one. I don't know if they've opened it yet, but a place where the victim can go, safe housing as well as trauma counseling. And it's a long road, right? Years to come over the abuse that's done to them with a job on the end.
So the Tebow Foundation has almost a dozen safe homes in the country,
Right.
and one of them already exists in Albany. I think there's a second one being developed.
Okay.
And obviously, you guys are in the business, we can't know where those are. But that foundation we've engaged as well to be part of this process because they're doing some great work all over the world. I'm really going to come back to your business leadership aspect because I think it's going to hit on a bunch of topics. Thank you. From our nonprofits, you guys are providing the services.
Sure, so I couldn't echo housing enough. There is neither enough shelter space for trafficking victims or enough housing space or funding for housing. A lot of the trafficking housing is very competitive and it often goes to larger city areas, right, where there's where you can demonstrate a higher number of trafficking victims, but that doesn't alter our need to provide people housing, and we know that housing is the foundation by which other improvements come, right? So if you don't have a house, you can't get a job. If you don't have a house, you can't really work on your safety, work on your therapy, work on any of those things. So I think housing is probably the number one issue for any population that faces violence. I also think prevention is really important, and sort of to your business model, I think providing prevention and education to places where we know trafficking happens but isn't always reported. Hotels, tattoo parlors. We do a lot of work with local tattoo parlors because we know that one of the things that traffickers do at a young age and then carries into adulthood is they brand people. And so if you can work with local tattoo parlors about recognizing the signs of trafficking, recognizing what branding looks like, and educate them on that, they don't want to do that. We've talked to a lot of people in tattoo parlors. They don't want to be a part of that. They might be able to provide resources in a safe way to get people the services that they need and redirect them out of a trafficking situation.
Yeah, I think, Bill, maybe we talk about a pilot program that's specific to educating the business community. It seems like you have the infrastructure here to really do something special that we can potentially copy and paste statewide. You hit on hotels. Kevin, you mentioned hotels. DSS, you work with hotels as a way to house individuals who are the most in need or most susceptible to being trafficked, right?
Well, we're not happy with that.
No, you're not. So let's talk about hotels. Obviously, I'm pretty sure we're all going to be in agreement. We need to end this practice of hourly payments for hotels. But talk to us a little bit about what that looks like.
Well, I mean, let me just go right off of that. I mean, housing, right, across so many levels, but certainly this as well, and the sheltering generally. So, if you want to talk about things like prevention, you can always take a look at the Safe Harbor program and add to it, because I think that's the type of thing that gives you funds for education. I mean, I just learned something that I didn't know, and it's actually quite alarming. It's branding business. I don't know about these things. The other thing is, and I think the counties here, we have in common our morality, right? So we don't get these resources that go to larger counties. It's understandable, money tends to follow population. But these issues do not discriminate against the population. That's a problem. So, we have task forces in Columbia County that are trying to figure out how to get development in, to get housing, because we have no housing stock. We have a very small DV, and our ability to service DV is very, very minimal because of that. So, if this is helpful, our smaller rural counties just struggle with the resources to do this, and I think that you have to try to get policymakers to move away from the idea that there needs to be economies of scale when it comes to certain prevention, because I just don't think that model works very well, because any victim, as soon as they're victimized, they don't really care that there's not economies of scale. So I join in that request for housing and to look more closely at that. I think the Safe Harbor program could always be enriched so that more education can come. I get about $35,000 for Columbia County. I'm hearing Saratoga gets about that, so we can take a look at that. And I'll just say before I turn it back over, none of us are happy that we have to house homeless populations in hotels. So we've been after this for years to talk about how to get rural counties the resources that they need to build homeless shelters, which are staffed better, and have resources that can better deal with this. Thank you.
Let me ask all of you guys this for the nonprofits and the DSS and anyone else in the room this impacts. When it comes to counties that have land banks and vacant properties that are owned by banks, is that an opportunity to figure out a way to create more shelter housing and more safe homes? Is that something you guys have discussed? That's one idea that came up in previous discussions. Just would love your thoughts on it.
I think one of the things that we always look at is, and we're trained in this early on through Safe Harbor, we're not trying to rescue these youth, we're trying to support them and meet them where they're at. So a lot of these youth are not ready to come into shelters, they're just not there. There's some youth that are, so we're trying to meet their needs on the street because that's still where they're at. When they do come into a shelter or housing, they can be challenging. So it's being able to have the staffing and resources to manage them within the shelter, because they only know what they know. So some of the behaviors can be very intense as well. So you need to be able to have the staffing to match that and the support to match that as well. Just to kind of go back to what somebody mentioned about staffing as well, because it does factor in. The way that we work with these youth the best is by having people who are well versed in how to work with these youth and know how to build rapport. The only way to do that is to retain people who have the experience to be able to do that. Safety is a very real concern because it was discussed, we are interfering with the business. we can have as many procedures in place as we want to, sign out, go in teams, all of that. But when you're out in the community, just like police, probation, CPS workers in certain counties have ballistic vests because it's gone to that extreme, because there's community violence. We don't have that option to get vests for our staff. Right now with Safe Harbor funds, it's not allowable. I can't buy ballistic vests with Safe Harbor funds. It's just not allowed. So I think we need to recognize the fact that these providers who are going out and helping this population are just in as much danger as other people
Yeah,
surrounding the
that's a good
streets
point.
from day to day. And that's a very real concern, especially when we're asking people to do this work and they don't feel safe. But how could they?
One aspect of what we're doing, because this isn't a conversation that ends today, right? It's a continued conversation. Now that you kind of have an idea of where we're going and what we're trying to do and accomplish, we'd love for the nonprofits to compile a list of, being able to quantify what resources you have and in your wish list of what you'd love to have in terms of being able to provide the services you need or the amount of units that you might need in terms of housing, right? That would really help us when we put our data together.
Just to go back to your question about the hotels, so we have different populations. And I think what happens with the hotels is we're always hesitant to put somebody into a hotel whose trafficking occurred through a hotel. One, it's unsafe, and two, it's traumatizing. So then we're looking at shelter space. Shelter space is really hard to find, and you don't want to put a trafficking victim into a homeless shelter, though you can at times. You want to put them into a domestic violence or sexual assault shelter where they're going to be able to access trauma services. Those spaces, I have a 40-bed shelter, we're full every single day of the year, right? We're turning people away. When I say that, we always find them someplace to go, but we cannot house the number of people that we receive requests for. But I do think with the hotel system, it gets really challenging because you have to stay within a rate if you're using the system. That's the system. And those hotels who accept that rate are not of the highest quality, right? And they're often housing elements, criminal elements already within them. So that creates a challenge when we are trying to house somebody to put them into a safe location. I think the other point that you made about staffing is really important. This population is really hard to engage, whether it's the youth or people over 18, which is who we serve typically. They come and they go. So if they have to rebuild that relationship with a new staff member every time, it's really hard to get them engaged with services because oftentimes we try and create a scenario where they know they can come back judgment-free. But that only works if they're coming back to somebody they know is going to be judgment-free. And so I think for our staff, we have to create safe environments, and then we also have to, pay them equitably for the work that they're doing.
Yes.
Yeah, follow up on what you said about, housing, especially youth, trafficking victims in shelters is very difficult. Because victims and survivors of human trafficking, they form a trauma bond with their perpetrator. And that bond is tight, and these people are convinced that the traffickers love them and care for them. So as safe as you want to keep them, you can bring them into a shelter. If they reach out to the trafficker and let them know where they are, you're now putting multiple other vulnerable kids in jeopardy of harm's way and possibility of also becoming trafficking victims. So it's very intertwined. And when we bring people into the White House, we're very, very cautious because we have an obligation to protect the babies that are living at the house, the infants and the toddlers that are living at the house. So if a trafficking victim is housed there, we have to really keep a close eye on and make sure that they're not communicating with their perpetrator, which they often do, unfortunately. So it is tight, and I wholeheartedly agree with you. They need to be in a facility that has that support, and it's a non-disclosed location, a very safe location, for sure.
How many beds do you have at the White House?
So for White House and our emergency shelter, we have 10 beds for emergency side. We have 7 plus 5 dependents, so 11 on our transitional side.
So Tabitha was referencing that it's full all the time. Is that your experience as well?
Yep.
Okay. Because wasn't there, we just got this report that was quantifying, right? This 2022 annual report that just came out from the Interagency Task Force on Human Trafficking. And I thought the number was somewhere in the 300s.
Yes.
in 2022. That seems like it's grossly underreporting then, based on just what I'm hearing here. I mean, that if you think of this just being two examples of a very small part of the whole state. So I mentioned that, but is there, in a shelter situation, is there a maximum stay? And what happens then? Is that an issue too with this population?
Yeah, so just to clarify, our program is a domestic violence program, so they're not all trafficking victims, but
Okay.
that is where we would house trafficking victims.
Okay.
But if we're full, we're full.
Right.
There is a maximum stay. A lot of times, if we're putting them into a shelter, we're using Department of Social Services funds to pay for that. 90 days, and then we can get, with certain circumstances, extensions on that. And I will say that we have a fantastic relationship with Rensselaer County DSS, who really hear us in that. You did no such thing. But there are lots of other counties in the state who do not have great relationships with their local Department of Social Services, and trafficking victims would meet that 90 days, or they don't, they're not understanding how the different funding streams work, because you can't put them in anonymously if that's better for their safety, but that's a process too. So you really have to sort of know the system, and it's harder. Like, I work for a big agency, right? It's harder when you work for a rural county, or you're working for a small agency. You only have a little bit of funding to do those things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because when I worked as an assistant county attorney in Saratoga County for a little while, and worked with you, Concetta, and worked a little with Jen. We're talking about hotels, but my experience is that it's motels,
Yes.
and
Yeah.
I learned that difference pretty quick. It's like the difference between a nice, clean, double-wide trailer and the one that you feel like you could put your foot through when you go to visit your client.
Yes.
So, but it sounds to me like rather than motels or hotels, what we want is we want supportive housing. So consider like Rise supportive housing, and we had one that was just built in Boston Spa, but then it's in other areas too. Do you happen to know do they house trafficking survivors as well, or who goes there? Because that is supportive housing.
They're apartments more than they are a shelter or traditional housing. They're apartments. A lot of times they're based on
For
the
adults.
lottery and
For adults.
Yes.
What about what Captain? We were supposed to have somebody here from Captain. I don't think he's here though. Jefferson, but did Captain do
Captain has a youth shelter.
up in Saratoga, right?
Yes.
And that's for youth.
Yes, it is.
And would that include trafficking survivors?
Absolutely.
It
yeah.
does.
And we allocate a portion of our Safe Harbor grant to pay for respite services for trafficked youth to stay at the Captain shelter.
Okay. All right. Thank you. I was just trying to get the lay of the land of what was around, just because I've been out of this.
White House partners with captains in many different grants and situations. The captains generally takes care of the underpopulation. But the problem that we run into with our shelter is that you have 30 days. So you have 30 days, you can get an extension for 60 and an extension for 90, but that's it. So with many of our youth that come to the door,
Yeah, what happens then?
with no clothing, no identification, no birth certificate, no ID, out of school district perhaps, it takes 90 days to get all that. And, and
Sure
then what
it
happens
does.
then? Where do you put a 16-year-old after 90 days if they're not allowed back home and they've claimed out of a 90-day shelter?
What does happen?
Well, we find a way. Oftentimes we have to discharge them and then bring them back. if possible.
And it starts a
It
new
starts a new clock.
90 going? Okay.
The transitional living program that we're running, that's a 2-year program. That is enough time to get people moving forward. But once that 2 years is up, it's up. So there's no extension. So really trying to find a way where we can advocate with the Office of Family and Children's Services to extend that emergency crisis side, because 30 days is just not enough. 90 days is just not enough.
So as you could tell with my phone, that will go off again, Scott. That was 20 minutes. That's how quick it goes. Just to wrap this up, when it comes to services, housing obviously was one of the most important, but wraparound services, engaging the business community on opportunities, engaging them early in the process so that it's not just about, hey, who are you and what do you need, but what do you want to do with your life and how do we make that meaningful for you and to be a contributor to the community. One topic that we didn't hit on enough is the fact that you have victims of trafficking being served by domestic violence nonprofits. And those are two different folks. I know, Ashley, you're specific to trafficking. That's great for Unity House. I know it doesn't happen in a lot of nonprofits to have someone specific. What do you guys see in that? And then we'll move on to the next topic.
So I do think there is a fair amount of crossover in regards to the cycle of abuse that happens with traffickers and perpetrators. It's very similar in regards to control tactics, which is why I think we're able to serve trafficking victims. We also have access to a lot of services for crime victims as a victim assistance program, so it fits well in our organization. But we do really have to differentiate what their safety concerns are, like with the business aspect of things. And then also we serve labor trafficking victims. We haven't really talked about their special needs, but labor trafficking victims have a whole different set of issues and concerns, particularly related to employment and how to move past trafficking into employment. So we are able to do that because we're such a large program. We can sort of set aside prevention staff to be able to focus on that. But a lot of times people aren't sure where trafficking fits in the violence world, right? And if you don't have a lot of expertise around trafficking or types of violence, it can be hard to figure out how to fit it into a domestic violence or sexual assault program, especially if you're doing labor trafficking. What I will say to you is most of the federal funding, it's tied together. It's sex trafficking and labor trafficking, which does turn a lot of programs away from applying for things because they're not versed in labor trafficking the way we might be.
Well, that's a good point. So we should look at advocating for our federal reps on trying to separate that a little bit. And if you could email us an example of that, Bernadette, just make sure you connect with Tabitha. That's a really good one I haven't heard yet. It's a really good one. Okay. Does anybody have a final question or thought before we move on to the next topic?
I have some thoughts about like access to healthcare. Many youth get addicted to drugs and they can't go away to rehabs. They're, sometimes, once you age out and you don't have insurance. So better services for our young people addicted to drugs would be helpful. Sometimes they come into the ER and there's not a lot of things we can offer them. And also maybe more support for our foster care system.
Yeah.
Sometimes we have children we hold in the ED who have no place to go because it's not safe for them to go home.
That's a really good bullet point. So supporting foster care systems and other existing issues and services to prevent potential of trafficking. You got something, man?
I was just going to say on the substance abuse, when they come in the hospital, there's situations where there's long waits, not enough bed to treat the initial, drug abuse or situation that they're in. Sometimes they don't end up ultimately in another place, right? They may go back out,
right,
not having received anything other than the immediate care, puts them right back in a desperate situation. So I think there is a lot to be said about the need to support the other issues that are part of this.
Yeah.
It's, because it is drug abuse, substance abuse, that may have opened the door or have a connection. It's mental illness too. It's a whole lot of outside, external from that.
Finding the interconnected aspects and making sure those services are not ignored while we address this issue. Yeah. Okay. The next topic. We're doing great. What coordination and tools do law enforcement and prosecutors need to better combat traffickers and help victims? In a nutshell, one thing we have heard is this is a multi-billion-dollar industry because a lot of the laws aren't caught up to what is happening, and it is easier to traffic humans than it is to deal in drugs. And that is a horrible, horrible thing we need to correct. But I would love to have our law enforcement and any of the nonprofits, anyone here who has something to recommend for us and talk about, lead the way.
I would say, if you don't mind, going back to like funding would be one of the things is depending on what type of law enforcement you're in. Funding is always an issue, obviously, but the trafficking has turned more to, computer and phone-based applications, chat rooms. So there's different different types of forensic tools that we use to extract information from, you know, a victim's cell phone or somebody that we have in custody, and they're not cheap. The funding for those, some of the programs that we have cost about $18,000 a year just for the initial application, and then you pay for additional updates and stuff. So, you know, some agencies have better funding, you know, so it comes back, you know, funding's always an issue, I guess.
I was at a conference, it was an education conference about social media and cell phones in schools, but they brought up an example of a foreign company catfishing a 14-year-old kid and getting them to send a photo to them and then blackmailing them for thousands of dollars, whatever the amount is. And then that 14-year-old, unfortunately, with no knowledge of their parents that even there is an issue, take him to a soccer practice and he ends his life. Horrible, horrible situations like that happening. Is that some of the exploitation that
yeah,
you're...
that's typically what they're using the apps for, and for just regular trafficking. You know, meeting online, thinking that there's somebody of, you know, the same age, and, you know, once they're committed and involved, they find out, they meet up, and it is somebody that's older, and so it's the digital age that makes it very easy to reach out and connect with not just you, but your friends and a group of your friends, and that's the interconnectivity of, you know.
So funding resources for law enforcement, funding resources potentially for school districts to be able to identify certain threats that are those some of the examples?
Well, yeah, maybe more education in schools as well.
Education in
so
schools.
that younger kids can see that, for lack of a better word, the grooming that's starting to happen when they connect with somebody on, you know, on any various, I don't want to label one app.
Right.
But,
Okay. Getting involved in social media technology and funding and resources for school districts, law enforcement agencies to address that. Thank you.
Right.
I'll go in reverse order of what I was going to do, but
No, go.
sure. Thanks. So Bethlehem School was attempting to identify the source of a major attack, and what probably was lost on most people is that Google refused to cooperate. That is a major issue that is really a federal government, but I think the state could be a leader in that.
Sure.
And when we do grand jury subpoenas to Facebook, they will notify the target unless we get a court order that prohibits the notification of the target. And so that really does make it difficult. And I'll go back to what I was going to do, because we're not a particularly sophisticated county. So most of ours aren't long-term investigations in that regard for trafficking, but they'll cap it at 90 days. So if you do a subpoena to Facebook, if they are reluctant to cooperate with it, and then generally the most they'll do is wait 90 days and then they tell the target. So those are real problems when you touch on very issues.
Absolutely.
I don't work for a school, but I would also say schools are overloaded with training requirements. And every time I hear, hey, let's have schools do education, I cringe, because my friends that do work in schools will try to figure out when they're going to educate in addition to training. But I do think that's really important. I think on behalf of rural, there's a very big difference between cities and rural communities. Trafficking for us is captured in this story best. We're rural, but there are real rural parts of rural. And the mom lives in a home that is not seen by anything, with 3 kids, a 14-year-old, a 9-year-old, and a 7-year-old, and I happen to spend a few hours with a 14-year-old care center recently. And 2 years ago, she was victimized by a 22-year-old. She reports people showing up, and then when she gives the names, they are names that anyone who's ever walked in law enforcement in Washington County knows, but they're pot people, they're drug people. And so I was struck listening to her as to, was she trying to protect the 7 and 9-year-old from these people coming in the house? And that's why she made some passive disclosure to a therapist? Or was she being victimized by that? But either way, she's smart enough to see that what her mom's habits are, what her mom's challenges are with addiction, are bringing perps into the house.
Right.
And so, but why I tell that story is not so much that, but that is trafficking in Washington County. It is young women, children, less, more young men are less vulnerable, I think, in Washington County than elsewhere, but I know it happens.
but they're being victimized by moms who, or parents who need access to drugs, and they're exposing them to that. There's many stories to go with it. But the thing that really struck me was the person who was her advocate turned to me during this and said, what can I tell her to make her feel safe? Because if she discloses, is mom removed from the home? Is she removed from the home? Where does she go? What does she do? How do we make this 14-year-old who is either trying to protect herself or denying 7-year-old, how do we make them feel safe? How do we make them feel safe? And I'm not good with not having the answers, and I didn't have an answer, so the timing is perfect. I think that's really goes to the real problem. What do we, if the 14-year-old is really being victimized by these two men, what do we do for her? Because mom can't protect them. And we've so gutted CPS abilities, I think, over the last 25 years, that you've lived it as well. I think that's a real challenge. And then so I think the definition of trafficking has to be more than just people that are being, and it's real, right? I mean, I understand the technique, but it's also the moms that are struggling with addiction, it's their kids, and those are the reality of it. And I think at the end of the day, it's going to be perception. I love what Bill's trying to do with the business community, because far too many people, good, smart, educated people, still look at someone struggling with addiction as though they're somehow, well, you know, they're at fault. And so it's easy to turn a blind eye to that. I really think that these conversations are great. And lastly, if you're going to struggle with addiction or mental health or these challenges, live in an urban setting because the resources are there to help, not in rural communities. And I love what you said, it's place a value on the life, not the number of people that you might be able to touch. And that's really where we struggle.
Defining trafficking in rural New York, that is going to be very important. Thank you for that.
But I imagine it happens in cities. I mean, that's just as prevalent if you're in the urban settings.
But you're right,
as
it's a
well.
different approach, and that should be noted in when we put this together. Thank you.
I do want to confirm what District Attorney Jordan said. You know, in the last 4 years at the White House, we've seen a shift on the reasons that kids are coming. You know, in the past, it was I was kicked out of my house because I was hot or this and that. The majority of kids come to us because they're parents, because they can't return home because they don't feel safe, or their parents are in crisis, their parents have mental health struggles that are unaddressed, their parents have substance use issues that are unaddressed. We had a young man who came to us in May, and he knocked on our door at 8 o'clock at night. He just wanted to graduate high school. That was his goal. You know, he said, "I can't do it. I can't do it while living at home. Can I come stay with you?" You know, and we took him in, and he did graduate. But that's the reality of what we're dealing with. And parents are making very difficult choices nowadays. Do I put gas in the car, or do I send my kid to baseball or football, or whatever the case may be? They're pulling them out of these extra activities that are so good for kids because they simply can't afford it. And they're making difficult choices whether to go to work or not go to work because they can't afford to do both. You know, and then that puts families in vulnerable positions where these very intelligent people come to them and say, you know, I'll give you $1,000 a week. You just have your kid do this for me. You know, he can't get in trouble. And if he gets caught, he just has to shut his mouth. You know, and that's the reality of the world we live in. You know, and I certainly don't want to speak for law enforcement, but I speak to a lot of officers and sheriffs in our community, and they're simply not making arrests because there's nothing they can do. You know, and that's pretty sad. You know, and these kids are put in these very difficult situations as well as the families. But definitely seen a shift on why the kids are coming to shelter services. Sure.
It's very interesting.
I just had a comment briefly with respect to local law enforcement in counties like ours, like in Rensselaer County. I think funding is primary as well as education into these types of cases, because what ends up happening in a place like Rensselaer County is something like this starts to unfold and suddenly, well, this has to do with technology and we need a non-disclosure subpoena. We better call the state police. And then the state police become completely overwhelmed because local law enforcement doesn't have the tools to handle it. So I think we really need an effort to educate local law enforcement about the cyber nature of what's going on, because we're seeing it all the time. The pictures, I've got a naked picture of you and I'm going to send it off, whether it's a child or a man or whoever it might be, and the voice comes in the middle of the night and it's got an accent and people are completely confused. And we're seeing it more and more and more.
So educating local law enforcement, but when it comes to some of the laws that are on the books and the fact that this is all now going to be technology driven or predominantly technology driven, are our laws outdated? Do we need to fix our laws so that local law enforcement can do their jobs?
Absolutely, and I was gonna ask if I could submit something in writing on that.
Yes,
but there's-
submit in writing, everybody, yes.
Absolutely.
Please.
I'd like to say, you mentioned funding,
Mhm.
and you mentioned, the grossly underreported number of 333.
Oh, yeah, Jesus.
And you mentioned cooperation. I often ask myself, when we're dealing with the victims and people who might have information that could benefit us in law enforcement, they don't come forward because of its discovery laws. We can't touch. You just put it out there.
Yeah.
And don't
Has to be
allow
addressed.
people to say, well, they can apply for protected
Right.
because it's impossible.
Say that again?
Well, the response will be, well, you can always ask for protected group. And there's two fallacies with that. One, many judges are uncomfortable issuing that. And two, they are smart business people. They know where they've been, who they've dealt with, and you cannot possibly redact something thoroughly enough to protect the identity when you turn to the individual and say, well, but I'm sure the DA will try. That's a little.
Yes, discovery laws has come before. That's something we're definitely going to talk about.
And I think for us, Nadia is here, she lives and works the world I do, is drug addiction. That is at the root of every single one of the cases that I've ever looked at and touched on in some form or fashion. And, what we did in 2019 was take away, it was an inhumane method, I get, where you put someone in jail to begin the process of recovery from addiction. But what the state didn't do is replace it with something else. So I know Assemblyman Simpson touched on it when he said we just put it back in the same community. But if I pick someone up off the street, provide them with Narcan, stabilize them, EMT takes them to the hospital, and they get there, and after being angry, they tell the hospital they want to leave. And there's nothing the hospital can do. Or if they're arrested for something else, there's nothing that can be done, and they're back in the same place. And that cycle, there's no safe place for them to go. And then add kids to the equation, I don't know. And I think that's the biggest challenge from an apolitical position is how are we going to properly care for our people that struggle. I mean, we're not even touching on mental health and lack of
Thank you.
appropriate placement.
And when we were discussing earlier about labor trafficking and human trafficking or sex trafficking, they're so intertwined right now, especially in rural counties, that it's business based. We go back to business. There are some businesses that's what their business is. They're a front for something, but they're behind closed doors. They're doing,
Now, when you talk about the business community, I know speaking to you earlier, businesses should just do the right thing and they want to do the right thing and humans should do the right thing. But are we talking about a potential tax credit incentive, something nothing like that?
We just rally the troops, preach the message of people before profits, and we do the right thing. And in the end, it will uplift the community, it will uplift profits, because when you're restoring people, they become your best employees, right? And the others that see that, and that's what does it. It's people getting involved in people's lives, entering into their pain, and going through it with them. That's what we got to do.
Can't argue that.
And then the other thing, going back to like housing, the motels, let's face it, most of the motels are housing sex offenders.
Yeah, they are.
And then we're taking people who are at risk, either from domestic violence or from being sex trafficked, and we're moving them in right next door, with them. So we're not solving anything. We're creating
a situation.
So that is
their employees.
That is a big issue, and again, not something we're going to solve today. But as the months go before the end of the year, when we figure out exactly what we're going to be putting in this, please send us some thoughts, because the hotels has come up every single place we went. We want ideas. We need them, and there's got to be some action on it for sure.
Well, I'll add quickly, and then we want to move on to the next thing. I've actually had docs down in my office to have a discussion about this. Just to see, that's where the relationship really has to start, right? Because you're going to have a release. I think the law, it makes a lot of sense that you're going to have a registration. It makes a lot of sense that you're able to identify in the community. It really does. But given the lack of housing, given the difficulty of finding housing that is there, there's been this push. So we get a lot of pushback from docs. This person needs to be released. This person needs to come to your community because there's been lawsuits, right? There's been lawsuits against docs and the state because the release isn't happening. But then small counties like mine, and all of those, I already am having a hard enough time housing folks that really need it, who have special needs. And now you're proposing to mix this population. It just isn't going to work out. So we said, while you're repurposing some of these older state buildings, why not convert it into housing for that population? I'm not suggesting they don't deserve the services. We simply can't bring them into the community and meet it. So this has been 5 years in our conversation, and it's going nowhere. Nowhere. It needs to go somewhere.
Okay. Last, any thoughts, final thoughts on our coordination and tools for law enforcement and prosecutors to better combat traffickers and help victims?
I'd just like to offer that in the same vein that policing is reactive rather than proactive, understanding that not every child receives the same instruction, the same anything in the household. I think it would behoove us to be proactive, fully engaged and involved in our communities and in our schools, rather than banning books and taking over school boards. Our kids need to know that once the photo's out there, it's out there. They need to know how significant this issue is. And perhaps like we do for Mothers Against Drunk Driving, have somebody who is strong enough and well enough to come in and share their story in the same way that we do other things. And then that will also help to get it out of the darkness.
And I can kind of piggyback on that with the prevention aspect of it. A lot of schools that we reach out to, me personally, that we want to go in, we want to educate, we get doors slammed in our face.
Yeah.
A, it's not happening in our community. It doesn't go on around here. Also, parents are going to, call us up yelling and screaming that you came in and talked about sex trafficking. We can't have that. So we're not educating our youth. We're not teaching them the signs and the awareness. And the schools have that option to turn us away. It's not a mandate that we're in there talking about it. And the youth need to know it because they don't understand technology and what's going on. They think they sent one friend a photo and now it's out there and they're like, well, what do you mean I can't get it back? So with the prevention aspect of that is it's very difficult to break those barriers to get in to educate the youth on it.
Just real quick on that, when you say youth and age, what are some of those ages? And in your opinion, based on your job and what you've done, what is the right age to start that education?
11 or younger.
11 or younger. That is scary to every parent.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I could tell you my experience with, some of the stuff I've been involved with, that's kind of old.
Yeah. I often
with today's day and age,
5 or older, but that really freaks people out.
Freaks me out.
There's really not a 6 or 7-year-old kid out there that doesn't have a tablet or an iPhone right about now.
Yeah.
So that's an entirely different
getting
matter.
it.
And I say this to the commissioners, my fellow commissioners. My 5-year plan is coming due. It's not on the state doesn't put it on its template, so I'm adding it, which is to say that part of my goal is to convince all of the school districts in my county to have a much, much more, I'll say, disciplined cell phone and social media policy generally. A couple of them really signed on and they're doing that now. I would suggest from the state level, and doing this, drive really hard to parents Okay, enough with social media for kids. Yeah, 5 and 6, because they're getting phones.
Yeah.
And they're getting on, and it's just not good.
Yeah, we know that there's a lot of movement right now, I think, at the state level, coming from the second floor to really, whether it's going to be pouches in schools, and we know that Bethlehem and some other schools are going to start to use that, even starting this fall. This Stop Addictive Feeds legislation that was passed like in the last few hours of session, we know that there's a lot of movement towards that, but I was just thinking when you were speaking earlier about, bringing it in, a kind of more as a cyber threat, kind of sort of training. We do dare, a lot of schools will do like dare training when it comes to other types of, addiction issues or, healthy, under the, for younger kids presented more as, this is how to live, a healthy life and resist peer pressure. And, maybe it could be blended into something like that. Although I'm mindful of what Tony was saying about putting another thing on the schools, but.
Well, I would say with that, maybe the SRO programs. I mean, they're
Yeah.
funded, like we have
Yeah.
an SRO in all 16 school districts, but funding for that for them to go in and do the training, not rely on the school districts.
Well, and if it were in the safe harbor budget, I know our provider would be happy to do that.
Yeah. We do healthy relationships in most of our schools, but when we start talking about trafficking, that's when the school gets a little nervous with us. And it really
Calling
is,
it that.
calling it that.
Yeah.
It's really district by district. There are some districts that are like, come in, talk about trafficking, talk about domestic violence, talk about sexual assault. Just be really clear with our kids. And then there are other places that are like, thanks, but no thanks. And we're going to do it. We're going to go in. We're going to do it when it's convenient for them. We've even offered to train teachers if they want it. So it really is dependent sort of on the district. The other thing I just wanted to state was, I think your conversation about being proactive instead of reactive. I think staying up to date with the technology is really, really hard. And I don't know of anybody who's like got a computer guy who like continuously learns the new technology, but it's really hard. And as soon as you bring a website down, the traffickers or whoever put another one up almost instantly. They're way ahead of us nationally in that way. They know that technology, and I don't. I mean, I Facebook, and that's about it.
Well, to touch on what you said, we eagerly await, not just you, but other communities, a collection of ideas to better strengthen our laws, to at least create some deterrence to make, hopefully, this issue a little bit better. I think that's going to be a big part of what we do. We are a team here, and because we're a team, my co-chair is going to take over from here on our next two topics. I think I left her with about 17.
He just jotted me like a little note and said, I have to leave after the second topic. I'm like, oh, thanks.
I think you have about 17 minutes per topic. The next two topics are going to be what impact is the migrant crisis having on trafficking, and then the last one is going to be what kinds of education and training are needed to better equip professionals and all New Yorkers to recognize someone who needs help. So I will leave you with
Right, bye.
Yeah, my colleagues.
Good to see you,
Appreciate
Brian.
you guys, and thank you from the bottom of my heart for being here. And hopefully you've seen we care, we genuinely want to tackle this issue, and your time is so valuable to us, and we appreciate that, and we won't waste it. Okay? Thanks, guys.
Thank you. All right. So Brian read it quickly. I'll read it again more slowly. But the next topic we were hoping to talk about was what impact is the migrant crisis having on human trafficking crimes within the state, in your experience? Thanks, Brian. Yeah.
I think it's having a huge impact. I think, again, even just in the hospitals, we're seeing a lot more migrant, refugee, asylum seekers that are victims of crimes, as far as like physical assault, sexual assault, and then to bring in the trafficking. I mean, it's so bad. And they're living, and where are they living? They're living in these motels. They're living in the motels with the sex offenders, with with everybody. So it's just like compounding. It's like made the problem so much worse. I know labor trafficking even too. I mean, we will come in and see people that are victims of trafficking. It doesn't specify what kind, but we're definitely seeing a huge uptick in labor trafficking. And it seems like, I know that there's like some kind of like 180 days or something they have to wait to start working. And it seems like if they could start working from the get-go, that would really help them in getting their own house and their own, not being reliant on somebody to do so.
Yeah, what is that? It's, isn't it like, if you are, was it the Venezuelans that got like an early, like, decision that was made saying, you don't have to wait that time, but then
was the Haitians.
other groups do, was it Haitians?
It was a Haitian group because they had serious issues in their country, so they allowed them to come and gave them a temporary.
To work faster,
Yeah.
earlier, Are there particular industries or types of jobs that these folks that you're aware of are going to be sent to certain areas to work, for kinds of jobs that are not the sex trafficking, but the
For
labor trafficking? Yeah.
From what I've seen, it's it's almost like I would be equivalent to like an indentured servant, where they're being sponsored by somebody, they're brought in, and then now they're taking care of their children, keeping their house clean. There's no ability to leave the house. There's no ability to get health care. There's no ability, so they might have a phone for a small period of time. So that's often what I'm seeing.
Yeah, there was a case like that in Niskayuna a few years ago. Where
I literally
woman
just
was like practically like locked in a closet.
I just met a woman yesterday.
Yeah, really.
So it's like, and it's all the time.
Good to know. Anybody else on that issue?
Some of the labor trafficking we've seen have to do with farm workers. That happens in the rural counties for sure. And then also cleaning services. We see some individuals who are trafficked through cleaning services, and then certainly the living in a home and being taken advantage, not paid hourly wages, not paid competitively. And then also there is some trafficking that occurs in the restaurant business for sure.
Okay.
So, I know a dishwasher right now working under the table who is definitely not making what they should be.
Okay.
And it's easy to, victimize those people because once they've done it for a while, they almost feel complicit in the crime, right? So they especially if they're illegal immigrants, I'm going to tell, and you've been doing it all this time. So you're sort of part of that. Or if they hold any sort of pull with their status in this country, that is a massive threat. People will do almost anything to keep the ability to maintain their status because they don't want to go back, particularly if they're going back to another situation where they're going to be victimized, which is often what we see. People flee from terrible situations, get here, and then they're already traumatized, and then they're re-victimized.
Thank you.
We don't necessarily go on Washington County Great House and see the migrant, but we do work with a community that has a lot of J1 student visas coming over. These are students from other countries who come over on a work visa for the summer. We live in a tourist area, Saratoga, Lake George, and we just simply don't have enough people to handle the hospitality field. So these young people come over on J1 student visas, and we have heard stories, and we've actually had someone at the White House last year. This young lady was from Jamaica, came over on a J1 visa, and the guy that she was working with at the hotel was holding on to everybody's passport until the end of the season. That is trafficking. That's labor trafficking. So stiffer penalties for hotel business owners who are doing things like that would be very critical to combat that. I don't think it's all that common anymore. We've done a really great job, Bill, and the business community includes a lot of the hospitality workers who are educating their staff on what human trafficking is. Especially the larger hotels, I have to say, are doing a pretty good job. Marriott, Hilton, educating their staff is actually part of their training curriculum and onboarding process now. But there are other communities in this country, or in our country, where you go to, when you get off the plane, there are human traffic announcements. If you see something, report something. We simply don't have that in New York State. And why not?
There have been, I remember, Matt and Scott, do you remember that Amy Poland, Assemblymember Poland, had a series of bills about notifications that need to be put up in rest stops, and I'm trying to think of other areas So that legislation has been done. I think there were probably 10 separate standalone bills just for different places where the notifications were going to be put up in different languages. So there was some movement on that, but I agree with you that how effective that is, I don't know.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
think that was a good idea, you know, printed materials all over through a, you know, but if you look at some of those, and I do this, they're all worn out, they're faded. So what it says to you is like, this program ain't going anymore. It's like the old neighborhood watch. Remember that back in the 70s? Everybody had a neighborhood community watch signs on their front lawns. What happens when they rusted and fell off? The crime rate went up.
Yeah.
And so the same with the printed materials. If people are going to really do that, they should be replaced regularly with shiny,
very practical.
new, you know, and maybe pertinent information that's important today. Maybe it wasn't important 15 years ago.
And resources change a lot with
True.
funding, so sometimes there's numbers on there that don't even,
Work anymore.
yeah.
And I think part of that problem is not having the funding there. It's great that we have the funding in the beginning to get those signs and awareness out there, but we need that continuing funding to keep those signs up to date and effective.
I think there needs to be 3 tiers to it. You need to have the awareness, the prevention, and then let us prosecute them afterwards. And I would say, fair to say, we're not really getting that very often. And I think that's why this is so important, because we see the signs in the bars and in the restaurants, but the awareness part is huge. And just going back to the kids and the use of the cell phones, I don't think the average parent knows how kids communicate. And it blew my mind to hear how young, I have 4 teenagers right now, I'm not indicting them for their behavior, but to hear about how kids communicate, and I'm like, oh my gosh, and that's the norm, and people don't think it's their kids doing it, and once that image or that encounter exists, that's how it's the path. And we had DARE back in the day, and we talked about that, and now we're doing a great job talking about the opioid crisis. Like, this needs to come out, because our kids are literally marketing themselves, which I think we're doing.
I feel like if once your children are teenagers, they're safer.
Right.
It's those 9-year-olds that don't know.
I went to another conference once and they were talking about all these like games all these kids are playing. They got their headphones on, parents are like, great, they're preoccupied, I don't have to worry about them. But they're communicating with all these people, so they could be 8, 9 years old, they're communicating with a 50-year-old man. And that 50-year-old
Like
man
Roblox.
is telling them like, hey, it's not considered abduction if you are running away. Tell your friends you don't want to be home anymore. Tell this one. And then they run away and that 50-year-old man picks them up on the corner. There's no Amber Alert that goes out because that kid has told everyone he ran away. And it's, you know, mom and dad go here. But there's predators on there. I have friends that I've been at their house before and I'm like, who is your son talking to? And they're like, oh, I don't know, someone on the game. I'm like, he's like 50. You know, like,
Yeah.
Parents have no idea.
No,
Like,
because
they're-
their kids are preoccupied. They're off their, you know, out of their hair for a little bit. But they don't realize to the extent of what is being.
Yeah, they think they're safe.
Yeah, and they're not.
Can I go back to the labor trafficking thing? So it's funny how you piece things together in your head, but the predominant way, or where taxation and finance might be able to help, you have businesses that are now commingling tips, right? They take all the cash out of the till, and what I wouldn't have thought of, except for it's actually, I know the exact case, where they're paying their kitchen help, who none of them speak English, cash, and then they pay tips out through payroll, maybe every 2 weeks or whatever the agreement is. And aside from the fairness of if I work the hardest, you know, the biggest shift, I get the same tip that the person who sees 2 customers. But I think the issue is you may find taxation and finance can backdoor into where you have people that are working, but we have to find a way not to punish the worker because that's the low-hanging fruit. They're the ones that are getting victimized, and find a way to address it with the employer. And I would bet it's happening in every business where you go behind in the alley or wherever the kitchen is and look at
the staff, chances are 70% of them are probably having to work that way. Maybe not all of them are criminals. But the problem we run into with taxation finance is if it's less than $500,000 or $1 million, they don't want to be a part of it.
Right.
But I think if we couch it in terms of this issue, that makes it far more significant than someone who's not related their sales tax every month that they're supposed to.
It's really interesting. That's an
I think
interesting
I can
point.
just go back to the, all of the posters and things like that. When the Safe Harbor program first began, there was a lot of money, there was a big push for wrapping buses and putting signs on tables at the mall and in the bathrooms and palm cards and shoe cards and all of those things. And there was money included in the Safe Harbor grants to be able to cover a lot of that. And as we get further and further down the road with the Safe Harbor and the money becomes less for each county, there becomes less for that because you're using that money more for direct service for the victims
Yeah.
who need
Right.
housing or clothing or something like that. So I would say that the funding was there initially, was the big push for all of those things that are now faded and outdated and need to
Okay.
be redone.
That's really interesting. So when did the Safe Harbor program really get ramped up to begin with?
I mean, so it's been a number of years, but I'm gonna
That's
say
2008.
2017.
2008?
Yeah.
You might want to change the name of it, ironically. I would imagine Safe Harbor has its own negative connotations.
Yeah.
That's true.
Well, it's also a
That's true.
401k term.
2018 in Washington County, that it started, our Safe Harbor program with,
Yes. I'm not sure anything exactly.
So maybe transition from printing flyers and maybe everybody's, well, we know they're on tablets, cell phones. We have the ability to push, like reverse 911 or geolocate to areas that you're at. So if you pull up near a travel, rest area on the thruway, that it sends out notification, you get an alert on your phone.
Yeah, there's a lot of things you can do that aren't a lot of money.
Right, I think the printing and stuff it's gonna be on the floor more than it's gonna be looked at.
It's just
Sure.
a matter of the funding to be able
Yep.
to do some of those things is less than what it was in the initial onset of the Safe Harbor program.
Well, in the Safe Harbor, initially, the focus was in New York City, so they started down there, and then it kind of moved its way upstate, and then they've slowly added on counties, and I think we're at all counties right now, or just about close. But the way that they did the funding is you initially got a smaller amount, and then the next year it increased a little bit. Then I think in the third year, when you went to your largest amount, and then after that, it came down.
Which the counties were supposed to put money in.
For sustainability, other funds were supposed to kick in, you were supposed to figure out a plan, but basically, if you couldn't do that, you built the program up. And then you had to scale it back because your funding came down. Luckily, we figured out a way to sustain a lot of things, but that's how that structure worked. And I think it's because they needed to do that to continuously add on counties that deducted from those earlier counties to then shift
We call it
the funding.
graduating. So you have a 5-year period and then you graduate.
Right.
Yeah.
It's just ridiculous because it takes 5 years to build momentum for a program.
Right.
To get movement on it, and then you just rip away the funding, you know what I mean? So, yeah, it was originally, developed for the boroughs in New York City. But, I mean, I want to, and I don't correct me on my numbers, but I want to say this year it was $1 million to split throughout the counties, which is not a lot of money. I can tell you what Wade House gets. We get $35,000 a year filtered through Warren County. Part of that goes towards the Safe Harbor coordinator, who we have to have on staff full-time, be the Safe Harbor coordinator. But, do the math. I mean, you got materials, you have insurance, you have, staff time, and that money is gone within a month or two. You know what I mean? That money's just spent. So we do fundraising to keep this.
I was going to ask how you fill the gaps then.
I go out personally and I talk to the Rotary clubs, I talk to Knights of Columbus, I talk to the Elks, and I say, we need money for this program. Thankfully, we do live in a very generous and giving community, so we haven't had that struggle. But that funding will dry up, through the Office of Financial Services. And it's just critical that these programs continue to go. And as this gentleman was saying, yes, it was filtered to another county who may not have Safe Harbor, and I get it, and I understand. But, the one thing that I do know also is that, economic growth is amazing. But with economic growth comes people, and with people comes social problems.
Yeah,
And
that's
social
right.
problems comes the
That's
need
right.
for services. So you can only grow economically so much before you have to address the social services issue. And if you can't, then you're in trouble. Then your economic growth stops to a halt, because no one will move to your community if you don't have the services to provide for domestic violence, for substance abuse, for mental health. And that's what we're experiencing in our area right now. We live in a city that has been blatant in saying there will be no more not-for-profits for non-taxable properties in the city. Okay. But if you want to continue to grow and we want more housing and all these things, you have to address those needs. It's basic economics and it's basic social services.
So not every county has the safe harbor program, and is that correct? Out of the 60-something, they all do now. They kind of ramped
What's happening
in.
is you get up to that certain amount, and
Yeah.
then they taper you back down so they can bring other counties on.
And is this a grant that the county has to apply for, or is it more like automatic now and it's distributed in a certain formula, some kind based on
Exactly.
population?
It's an appropriation,
Yeah. Okay.
It's an appropriation, and I'll speak for my county, but I'll bet you it's very similar. And right now, we're working on FY '25.
Sure.
And my board of supervisors has now come back twice. Hey, is there any money you can give back, right? Because sales tax are down. I get it. That is a critical program that I would suggest among your colleagues, you do not base that on contributions from the counties, because there's just not money there.
Yep, okay. Good to know. So on this topic, so I don't have an annoying alarm on my phone, but I think we're probably coming up a little bit on our limit. But anybody have any closing comments on the topic, which started out anyway as what impact is the migrant crisis having on human trafficking crimes within the state? We went a little bit off, but I feel like that was a valuable discussion too. I certainly benefited from hearing about that. But do you think that we're ready to move on, or does anybody have any final words on that one? We're good to move on? All right, going. Last topic for the day that we'd like to talk about before we kind of do a recap and closing remarks. The last topic is what kinds of education and training are needed to better equip professionals and all New Yorkers to recognize someone who needs help. So we've kind of been talking about this all along a little bit, but does anybody have anything to add on that topic itself as far as education and training needed to better equip professionals and all New Yorkers to recognize
I'll
someone?
address it. In Montgomery County, probably 10 years ago, we started a group with school districts, so superintendents, emergency nurses, emergency room nurses, public health, mental health, social services. And we got together monthly. To get school superintendents to show up monthly was a huge success for us.
Yeah.
And so we said, all right, now we got it.
Yeah.
And we started around school shootings. What do we do? Well, what are the things that we can prevent, these threats that were becoming almost daily, across the state. And so we came up with some great ideas. We shared a lot of ideas. We had school principals show up and just get exposed to things, ideas. We started talking about fentanyl. We started talking about a lot of different things that just came up from the schools with vaping, And but one of the things that came out that really kind of helped the whole community was prevention workers. So I suggested, why don't we put caseworkers, prevention types, in the schools? Not in the high school, but in the 6th, 7th, 8th grade.
Right.
And
Okay.
Kevin and I are doing that now in Rensselaer County. And so it gives the teachers a place to go and say, hey, I got an issue here. They don't want to make a hotline call, but they kind of just want to get some advice on something that could be. And they really felt very supported in that. I think families did too. And the idea was, the philosophy was, catch these things when they're just festering. 5th, 6th, 7th grade. Don't wait till they're 11th grade. That training has left the station. Not saying we don't got to deal with it, but deal with these younger kids. And it's been very successful in this county. I think the school superintendents and the schools are very thankful. And it really originated in Schoharie County with the former commissioner, he was commissioner like 20 years ago, is to focus on young kids and hear what's going on, fix those issues out. and engage with the family. Get them the services they need. Maybe it's substance abuse. Maybe it's something else, And so it's something we're growing. I think we've got some more work to do, but it's been well received. And this legislature here has been fully behind it.
Good,
So
good. That's good to
that's
hear.
good news. And maybe that's a model like we looked at other places.
Like we're doing that too.
All right.
We just partnered with BOCES about a year and a half ago, started the Saratoga County Interagency Coalition. We meet monthly with the school superintendents. We bring in a speaker from a community agency each month during the school year, and that speaker is invited to stay and become part of the panel every month. The school resource officer supervisor is part of that panel. Mental health, substance abuse. Our Safe Harbor coordinator at the time did a presentation, and so captains at the table.
Okay.
So it really is helpful to get at least to that level. When you get to the superintendents and you've got their buy-in, a lot of times you can get that information trickled down, and that's how you get into the school to be able to provide the information directly to the staff and the students there. So we found it to be very successful as well.
That's good.
I think trauma-informed training, because a lot of these survivors or people that are being trafficked have been through something. They don't grow up saying, I want to be a prostitute, or so something's happened to them. So trauma-informed training to build, they don't trust us. They don't even trust us nurses all the time. And definitely not law enforcement. No, that's what so we need that training as professionals, and also healthcare workers need training, because the statistics are that 80% of trafficking victims enter the healthcare system in some sort of way.
And not just emergency medicine too, but I mean, we're working with our outpatient clinics, especially like for OBGYN, just because they're, they're seeing a lot of domestic violence and trafficking too. But people, you would think that, I definitely, like emergency room.
I was gonna say,
Hospital.
I had a
Hospitals,
situation, a young girl, I feel like the emergency rooms, they get all panicked. They have someone come in and they're like, what do we do? Collaboration, they're all like, what do we do? What do we do? I had a young girl come in, they called me because she jumped out of a window to get away from this man, but the day before, they're like, we think she's being trafficked. And I was like, oh, why? They're like, oh, she was here yesterday with an older gentleman who wouldn't let us touch her, wouldn't let us do anything, wouldn't let us in, and they let her go. He dictated that you're not going to touch her, left AMA, but I'm like, how did she even get out the door with this gentleman? How did nobody intervene? But I think people just don't know how to handle it.
And I think too, you have 4 nurses and 80 patients.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. It's true.
And
The healthcare,
Situation.
it's difficult. You go in the emergency rooms, patients are sitting out in the waiting rooms for, here and there.
And I would say
12
availability
hours.
to training
Yeah.
and affordable training, so businesses can send their staff to it.
Yeah.
Or that the staff can attend it and it would fall within your funding category to receive those trainings to stay up somewhat to date with the technology and everything else that is out there. Training's not a cheap thing that comes by, so a lot of times you have to pass that when you're working on tight budgets.
And getting survivors to help us, to help inform us. We should have somebody at the table.
We've heard that.
And they should be compensated. Like, you want them to volunteer to, some sort of compensation to help them guide us.
Pushback I get from schools too, or that you hear, is they don't want, who's the person coming in and what are they going to be saying to our students? So if state ed could develop, in conjunction with these folks, what that training looks like about trafficking, about the vulnerability of the addiction, then the superintendents lose that, well, don't enter our, it's really more so the building principles. I don't think the superintendents are the challenge, but if you could have something that was state approved, that someone comes in and is providing, that may help somebody who loves the schools to step up.
And if it's backed by the state, I think the school superintendents feel better by allowing it to come in, because then when the parents call or write in the letters, they can say the state, they can kind of almost pass that buck a little bit of, not that they allowed someone to come in and speak. A lot of times we've sent it directly to the superintendents. This is our presentation we would like to present on healthy, positive relationships. you know, and we get their feedback, and a lot of times that helps. Then when you just call or stop in and say, hey, can we come in and do this? I mean, they turn, you know, scared, like, oh no, what are you gonna come in and talk about and teach the kids, and they're gonna go home and say, and so that helps out a lot when we provide them that presentation of what we're looking to do.
Reports of abuse go up after every presentation.
Absolutely.
Yes. Oh, I bet. I bet.
Schools are so
100%.
terrified schools are terrified of losing funding. You know, if you take a rural community like Whitehall, for example, who has, you know, an average of 40 students graduating each year, and we do a presentation on human trafficking, parents decide to pull 4 of those kids out of their classes, you know, that's 10% of their graduation class.
Yeah.
You know, and that funding just trickles down, you know, so they're terrified of losing funding. You know, we do focus groups with school principals and districts and things like that, and that's the number one thing. What can we do for you? Get our graduation rates up. You know, so they're very, very skeptical about who they bring into their school.
That's interesting.
Very skeptical.
That's interesting.
And they never have time. They always, they have so much to do in a school year, I think, too.
They're packing more and more in,
Yes.
more and more requirements.
Yes.
Yeah, I know.
Some of you
I know.
remember the movie they had out probably 10 years ago. It was animated. It's called
Little Red. Little Red, yeah.
And, you know, we said, this is a great idea. Let's give this to the superintendents, set up dates. And, you know, then people start saying, well, what if somebody does disclose? Well, you should actually plan that.
Should
That's
know
probably
what
gonna
to
happen.
do. Yeah.
And that was one of the reasons why they didn't do it. You know, it's like, well, wait a minute, you know. You could have a theater that agreed to let us have the whole theater for free, because you had to pay for the movie. I forget what it was, but it wasn't cheap to rent. And once again, we got so much pushback that we said, all right, let's do something else. You know, it's a shame, because it was only a 10-minute movie.
Is that right?
What was it, 10-minute movie?
Yeah.
And then the idea was to have some discussion around it afterwards. And that freaked out the crowd. And I think some of the teachers did.
Wow.
I don't know if it's still
Sounds like
out there.
there's a lot of
Sure,
work to do.
probably is. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think the other point of education, we talked a little bit about it, but is the combination of drug use and trafficking.
Yes.
Because you have a lot of these younger kids who are engaging with older people on the internet and are often getting introduced to drug use through that way. And once you're addicted, it's a lot easier to manipulate somebody if you're going to provide them with those drugs. And I think the stigma related to substance use is that that was your choice and that you're doing it willingly, right? But for a lot of these people who are in a trafficking situation, it was not their choice, or they were forced to use, and now they're addicted. And I think we forget that and really sort of put that on them. I also think that we always want trafficking victims to have a good choice and a bad choice. For some of these individuals, there's only 2 bad choices, and our job is to help them make the best of the bad choice and be okay with that. And that's a challenge, because there's not always a good opportunity for them or a good choice for them, especially for our young people. You know, sometimes their choice is like sleeping on the street or going back to a really hard situation.
Right.
So
Right.
I think we have to, as a community, have to sort of take that stigma away that we see that impacts all of those populations, and think about it in a different way as them being victims of the circumstances they've fallen into.
Boy, that really strikes me, what you're saying. Because I when you were talking earlier about, a chapter or a training called Healthy Positive Relationships, and I think about the time that I spent working with CPS in foster care, and you think about a lifetime of deficient parenting or a lifetime of all kinds of problems, and then a segment taught on healthy positive relationships. I mean, it seems like you're really fighting against a lot of years of bad things,
Yeah.
to try to show somebody that it can be different. Yeah.
That young girl, to kind of like tap in on that young girl that I saw, I mean, she was late adolescence now, but so background to her was her mother got her addicted to crack cocaine, who then was utilizing her for gang raping to get drugs from these people. So then she finally got out of that situation and plugged in with this gentleman who wasn't sexually assaulting her, but was feeding her pills because he was a drug dealer and utilizing her now to sell his drugs, but maintaining that relationship by feeding her addiction, and kept feeding it and feeding it and feeding it. So like for us, she jumped out of a window to get away from him, came to us, we offered her every service we possibly could to keep her safe. She was adamant she was not going to go back to him, but we reached out to her in a couple days, the advocate, and she had no response. So ultimately, she probably went back into that situation because he was the one who was feeding her addiction, knew to play off of that. But if there was like in school, who knows, maybe if she had the opportunity to hear about, you know, a training, whatever, going into schools, who would have known maybe when she was younger, she could have disclosed to someone what her mother was doing and break that chain or
Stop it early.
Yeah.
They don't identify as victims.
No.
No.
She was such a tough girl. Like listening to her, she was so strong. She was so like she just didn't recognize
A lot of
the
trafficking
extent
victims don't
of-
realize
right.
that they are a trafficked
Yeah.
victim. They don't.
Yeah.
That's
But
so
that's
interesting.
the way of life.
Survival skills.
Yeah.
Skills that they've developed early on, and that they've used to survive in really challenging circumstances.
And you try so hard to get them to recognize and utilize the services that are available to them, but they just do not. It's such a norm to them. It's become their
I had-
lifestyle.
I had a patient whose aunt was trafficking her and using her to give oral sex for money, and she was okay with that. It was when that man raped her in a different way that became a problem. But the oral sex was normal for her. She was helping provide money for her family.
You said that you had a question, Robert?
Well, I did. In a situation like that, because you're nurses, does HIPAA come into play?
Yeah.
So you're not going anywhere with that?
No. And that's what we try to.
But we are mandated reporters
Right.
of their
Right, so how do
children.
we get through that? Does mandate actually supersede that?
Yes.
Yes, if it's a child.
If it's a child.
If it's an 18-year-old, no.
Yeah.
Right, but if it's a child.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Following up on something that, Michael, that you said earlier, and I think that Tony had said about the CPS system really being broken for a number of years, and I think you said that at the school level, they don't want to have to hotline something. So isn't that that's a maybe a problem that's bigger than what this report can be? But if that's the system that we have in place to take hotlines and concerns that you are obligated to make for youth, but you do have the HIPAA concerns obviously too, and you want to build that trust and feeling of safety that the individual has. I mean, that's just a very rough combination of problems, isn't it?
I mean, to engage CPS, of course, you have to go through the hotline system, right, the SCR. But in this case, we have caseworkers in the schools. They may just say, hey, I'm noticing this kid's coming to school every day, wearing the same clothes.
Yeah.
You know, and maybe it doesn't rise to hotline, but maybe
Right.
it does too. Maybe,
Right.
Well, that's hotline, you know. But it gives the teacher, the faculty, it's just another set of ideas. Because I used to get accosted in Montgomery County in the store and they'd say, hey, you took away my kids. I said, well, I didn't take away your kids, you know. They say, well, or they say, we've called and you never show up. It's like, well, you're not calling me. You know, and try to educate somebody in Price Chopper, you know, on a Saturday morning. Here's what happens, you know. Of course, take the information and call them back, but there's a lot of misconceptions, a lot of myth around how CPS works. And if you call them, you know, guess what? They're coming to take your kids.
I think that's the prevention aspect
Yeah.
as well.
Yeah.
Only certain things rise to the level of CPS intervention, but I think some of the point is at certain times schools feel like that's their only mechanism for addressing issues. So by having that prevention aspect to it, you're giving schools a different avenue.
Yes.
Like before we call a CPS report in, let me call this provider, let me call Unity House and consult, let me call the shelter and see if they can help with some outreach. Kind of giving them some different options on that. So it doesn't always go to a system that's already overwhelmed. That's part of the issue. So prevention plays a big aspect, a big part in kind of taking some of the burden off of other systems as well.
That's a very good point.
And it also has to be somebody legally responsible.
Yeah.
So we might have a 14-year-old meeting men online, and they sneak out of their house, their parents do the right thing, so that's not CPS.
You could still call, you could still contact law enforcement.
Not as a healthcare provider, unless I have consent from my patient.
That's where it comes into play.
Yeah.
It's very different.
So
It's,
how many consent, this is a
and like,
shocking
and
statistic.
reproductive
How many-
health comes
how many
into play
consent
big time
have law
too.
enforcement notified that you perform a sex?
How many what?
How many of your victims will consent to law enforcement being
We have a
notified?
pretty good rate in our counties. I would say about, we have like 30%, 20 or less that don't report. So we're lucky.
Oh, that is lucky.
But
It is good, and we have,
we're in more of an urban area, and I would say probably more like 30% report, honestly. Yeah.
Right?
Hmm.
This is-
Partly, there's different reasons.
The other thing you might want to look at is, in the criminal justice system, and rightly so, there's been a large push to address implicit bias in terms of jurors toward the defendant. But equally, I've heard here multiple times that there's an implicit bias toward rape victims, toward people that are struggling with addiction. And I think if we don't address that, why would a woman come forward and
Right.
subject herself, or a man, subject themselves to that process when most likely, I probably doubt Jennifer can convince them that the jury's not going to look at them and say, what did you do to deserve it? And
Right.
I think we have to address that across the board. I don't think we do it just in the trial setting, because that's too big. But how do we work in the hospital setting to address those?
And that's where trauma-informed care actually
that
comes
is,
in.
that needs to
And,
be
you know,
done.
moving, I say in my little spiel, moving towards what's wrong with you to what happened to you. And that's a good way to summarize
That's a good way
it.
to look at it. Well, we tried to structure our discussion a little bit based on 4 questions. We got through them, but before we call it a day with thanks and maybe a couple of closing comments, if anyone came in really wanting to say something else that we didn't get to or that wasn't really part of the discussion, now would be a really good time to get that off your chest and get that kind of into our minds, before we break. We were always very open to having any comments. I know when Brian was here, he was asking for anybody afterwards. If there's something that occurred to you or something that you think of later or you thought of today and it's a little long, maybe we would love to take anything in that you could give us that will help us in addition to what's already happened today. So speak now before we move to any closing statements. Anybody else have anything else on your mind on this topic?
I would just suggest inviting state education to the table. Because the reality is we drop our kids off, but the teachers spend more time with our kids in a day than we do. And they have much more of an opportunity to offer some preventative tips to the kids. So invite them to the table.
That's a great idea. We do have further scheduled around other parts of the state, so maybe we can include them on our list of invitees. Thank you. Yeah.
Sometimes they only see.
Anybody else?
I think it's important to take a close look. Privacy laws are great. They're great, but always continue to look at them, because this is one of those situations, what we're alluding to in our world, it's called person legally responsible, called PLRs.
PLRs.
But I gotta tell you, in a situation like that, I would want it at some point mandatory if I had a 14-year-old to say, look, we understand the concern, but we must report this to law enforcement. We will protect you.
So hard.
Because I'll tell you.
They won't come for care. That's the double-edged sword.
Yeah.
Well, I get it. I've been all through, but too many perps get to continue to get another shot.
So related, but not related, there was a bill that came up at the very end of session that Consetta, you and I spoke about, because Consetta's one of my phone a friends when I get hit with a really hard bill and I need to talk to somebody, one of my phone a friends. But it was a bill that basically said that if there was a call made to the state central registry and the individual making the call would not leave their name and their contact information, including an email, that there was no need to forward that hotline call to anybody. And I was like, absolutely not. That's not how that works. That was a push, Tony, at the end of session. And that's the entire point of having this hotline procedure. And I went around and around, and I just said, no way. So I was able to put it away for that session, but there were lobbyists really pushing for that, because they, well, that was the whole reason I wanted to go into it. But anyway, there's a lot of stuff out that's frightening on a legislative level that comes up that, we need to have people serving that understand what the implications of that are. So anyway, I was glad I could help get rid of that. But anyway.
The important distinction is not make sure you don't discourage reporting. That is
Exactly, yes.
critical,
Exactly.
As opposed to, what do I do with
That's what I said. It was related, but kind of opposite. Well, I want to thank all of you on behalf of Brian Marr, who needed to leave, and myself. Thank you very much for coming. Scott, do you have any closing remarks that you'd like to make?
I'll just say thank you all for coming. This was
Yeah.
really great, and I really appreciate all the feedback, and I really do, I'm grateful that you guys all came and supported us on this. Thank you.
Yes, Matt?
Thank you all for being here. Thank you for all the work that you're doing to
Yeah.
help with this issue.
What is the, like, the email, it was Bernadette, is that the one they use? If we have, if we have anything else that comes into our head.
Yes, Bernadette? Yeah. Yes, we'll take any ideas you got. Thank you so much. Okay.